Hello, everybody. Let's have a round of applause. Thank you so much for coming. My name is John DeLynn. For those of you who don't know, it's March 9th, 2016. We're very excited to have you with us today at Club 50 West here in downtown Salt Lake City. We want to welcome all those with us in Periscope land. I want to thank everyone for joining us. Few housekeeping rules before we begin. As always, we're really grateful to the good people at Club Cafe at 50 West for sponsoring us. Let's give Jake and all the good people here a hand. We love this venue, and we're super grateful to be here today. Want to thank all those who are listening and those of you who are supporters of Mormon Stories podcast or the Open Stories Foundation. Your donations are what make this possible. Those of you who don't know, the cover charge you guys paid tonight to be here in person, some of that will go to the Open Stories Foundation to keep the lights on, but we're also going to donate a portion of that to Planned Parenthood, which is Kate's organization. So we're excited about that. But I just want to give a shout out to all my listeners and to those who support us, because that's what makes all this possible. So thank you. We're really, you can find us at mormonstories.org. For those of you who don't know, that's our website. This is the Mormon Stories Live series. This is, I guess, our second official Mormon Stories Live event. We had one on medical marijuana a few weeks back. We also had Jeremy Runnels here as well recently. But we plan on doing these events every week or two here in Salt Lake City. So we're grateful that you guys are supporting this series, and we hope you'll join us again for more in the future. So that's kind of all the housekeeping rules for now. And I think we're ready to roll. Ready to roll? Mm-hmm. All right. So today we are super excited to have back with us on Mormon Stories, Kate Kelly. Kate Kelly's been on Mormon Stories a few times, but it's been a while since we've interviewed Kate, since kind of her excommunication. So those of you who don't know, Kate Kelly has been, in her former life, she worked as a human rights attorney for quite a while. She's always been involved in social justice kind of activities, but awareness of Kate really picked up. Was it 2013? When does Ordain Women start?
Yeah, January
2013, and that's when Kate kind of burst on the scenes. And it was very fun for Kate and I to receive twin letters about our disciplinary councils. In 2014, June of 2014. So we were sort of joined, as if we weren't joined before then. We became eternally sealed, so to speak, at that point. And many of you will know that Kate was excommunicated from the church that August, was it, of 2000?
I was excommunicated June 26th of 2014.
Okay, so it was June. Mm-hmm. And then my stuff came a little bit later. So we've covered that quite a bit. For those who haven't heard, you can listen all about that process on Mormon Stories in the past. But today we have a really full menu of things to talk about. We want to talk about Kate's life since excommunication. We're going to talk about what that's been like for her. Some of you will know that her relationship status changed a bit, so we'll talk a little bit about that as well. But then Kate has come back to Salt Lake City and has been very active as sort of an advocate or an employee of Planned Parenthood. So we're going to be talking about female reproductive rights. We're going to be talking about healthy sexuality. We're going to be talking about abortion and contraception. I think Kate even brought some safe sex kits, so we can talk about that as well. So we've got a lot of fun things to talk about, and we hope to get to your questions as well. So we've got a lot of fun stuff. So without any further ado, everyone, please give Kate Kelly a warm welcome to Mormon Stories Live. All right, Kate, welcome back.
Thanks. Thanks
Yeah.
for having me.
So it's been a little while. It's been almost a year and a half, maybe, since your excommunication.
Yeah.
So why don't we start there? Like, looking back now, I'm sure people could have all sorts of questions like, are you happy? Are you not happy? Do you look back with sadness or regret? Happier than ever? Talk a little bit about what kind of your reflections on just that experience, if you have any thoughts.
I mean, is it true happiness, though, John?
I don't know. I don't know.
So, yeah.
Your light has dimmed a little bit.
It has dimmed.
Or maybe it's gotten brighter.
It has dimmed.
Is she bright or dimmer? What do you guys think? I think the crowd is voting
Thank you.
brighter.
My countenance. It's funny because it's right when I got excommunicated, I also moved to Nairobi, Kenya. And so it was this like really big, like, got excommunicated, had all this press, like, did all these things, also moved to Africa, like, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's been like a large amount of change in a very short amount of time.
Yeah.
Which I actually I like, because I'm a person who just really likes to be as authentic as possible, I learn through conversation and through engaging and doing all these different things, and I want to be as authentic as I can in the moment. So it's been very, very difficult for obvious reasons in a lot of ways, but it's also been great. Yeah, I feel really good. I went to Kenya, but I'm back. I moved back to Salt Lake City, and everyone's like, "Why did you come back?" And I think, there's a lot of reasons why I came back, but one of them is I think my talents and my, the way that I have learned how to be an activist and a feminist can be best utilized in the Mormon and post-Mormon communities. And so, I'm back.
Yeah, welcome back.
Yeah, thanks. I think a lot of people thought they saw, the excommunication had a lot of press around it, and they saw me like crying and all these different things, and then it just like dropped off. So I was like, oh, and then she died or like went away.
Yeah.
And so it's hard to like help people understand that the narrative continues, and that it was very painful and difficult to be excommunicated for a lot of reasons, and a lot of them I talked about on Mormon Stories before, but also that like the growth continues and life goes on.
So I've known you well enough for enough time to know that your engagement with Mormonism wasn't out of a disrespect or a hatred for Mormonism, but instead was out of really deep-seated love for it. At least that's how I always perceived you. And so I know that in many ways, excommunication is sort of every believing Mormon's worst nightmare. So looking back now, people would say, is she miserable? Is it awful? Has your light gone out? Like, talk about what that's been like for you to not have the church in your life. And is it better than you thought, worse than you thought? How has that been?
I think the reason that...
Do you miss it?
I actually don't at all. Sunday brunch is really great, guys. If you haven't been yet, just try it. And that's a really flippant way to say that I actually don't miss Mormonism. I don't miss like singing the hymns and going to church and all those different things, really at all. But I understand why people do, and I understand, for me, I don't know. It's just been. I have such a rich and fulfilling life outside of the church that it wasn't. I think my transition out of Mormonism was probably easier than for some people. For my parents, for example, who live in Provo, Utah, and dedicated their whole lives to the church, or a big portion of their lives to the church. And so for me, it's been relatively, and again, this is relative to what I've seen other people struggle through, painless. The day after I got excommunicated, I just took off my garments and put them in a garbage bag.
Yeah, we saw
my
that.
bed.
We noticed those shoulders. that
you saw
day
the
right after.
Shoulder gate.
Yeah.
I bought that dress. I was prepared, John. I had my excommunication dress ready. And I think it's just so funny because it's been a quick transition, but it's also hard to remember what it was like. Like, it's hard to remember what it was like. It's hard to remember how you felt and thought. Like, the way that I feel now, people are like, oh, so you didn't really believe in Mormonism. Oh, so you didn't really care. Oh, blah, 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 blah. I'm like, no, I just changed my mind. Like, people, not just Mormons, but all people have a very, have an aversion to changing your mind. Like, changing your mind about something. And I change my mind a lot about really fundamental things. And I try to keep an open mind and, like, keep, there's only, like, a very few things that I haven't changed my mind about yet. And having children, getting a tattoo.
Those things haven't changed.
I'm just
so no tattoo.
Them. No tattoo.
No tattoo
no
and
tattoo.
no children as of now.
As of now.
Okay.
But I think I don't know. I don't miss the church, and I also don't have an antagonism towards it. I understand why people do, but I think that's why it was easy for me to come back to Utah and go to, like, I just went to the Provo temple dedication, or sorry, not the dedication, not allowed to that, the open house. So I went to the Provo open house, went through the whole temple.
What was that like for you to be in a temple?
Again, it's like, I don't feel this angst, I think. Like, I go to church occasionally. Like, my sister had a baby blessing. I went. I didn't participate.
Did you participate? I was going to ask.
For obvious reasons.
Did you get to hold the baby?
I did not hold the baby.
Okay.
Nope, I did not. I didn't run up there and squeeze in the circle. And, I respect folks who stay in the church. I understand. I very, very, very keenly understand why they stay. But it just, I didn't do anything wrong. I have nothing to be ashamed of. Like, if anyone has anything to be ashamed of, it's them. And so I don't feel any compunction, like going to Temple Square, going to church, going to, if I want to go see what the inside of the Provo Temple looks like, I go, because I don't feel bad. I have nothing to be ashamed of. So.
Looking back, when people say, oh, they were too bold, or they were too strident, or the actions were too aggressive, when you look back, do you regret either way, being too aggressive or not being aggressive enough, or do you feel at peace with how you handled Ordain Women?
I mean, Ordain Women is and was at the beginning just this very, like, organic grassroots thing of Mormon women getting together and trying to raise our voices in the best way we could. There wasn't, like, I will be the first one to admit there wasn't, like, a long game. It was just like, we want to speak up, we want to do a direct action, this is what we're going to do, and it evolved over time. And so if I regret anything, it is actually that we weren't bold enough. I think we did the first action, and then we repeated the action, which I actually voted against, but at that point we had built a leadership structure, and it was more people and lots of voices in conversation. And so if there's anything I regret, it's not being aggressive enough. Not everyone agrees with that.
Sure. Have you talked at all about your kind of separating from Ordained Women, or is that something you haven't talked about, or do you want to talk about that?
Sure. I mean, I'm actually not separated from Ordained Women. I'm still on the advisory board. We're very structured now. We have an executive board that controls the day-to-day and the actions they're doing now, and runs the website and all that kind of thing. They still get profiles. If anyone here hasn't submitted one, I encourage you to do so at ordainwomen.org. But I'm not involved for emotional reasons and for just practical reasons. Like, I don't have as much time. I'm not involved in the executive board, but there's an advisory board of people who kind of just chime in and help when necessary. So I still am on that, and I'm still connected, very much connected to the group.
When the church kind of came after you, I think there were many of us who sort of felt like the strategy was he kind of cut off the head and the snake dies, so to speak. I hate to be that graphic, but and this is tough because I know pretty much most of the current Ordained Women board. I really love them all. I really respect them. I really wish them well. But if I'm being totally honest, it feels like they really, in my perception, it appears as though Ordained Women lost a lot of steam, almost to the extent that you could say that the brethren kind of maybe succeeded when they got rid of you, because we haven't heard much from them. Maybe whatever actions they've done haven't reached the same level. And so it's almost like you could say they kind of won. Talk about Ordained Women's profiles since you've left. I don't want would never want to split or create tension with you and the other people in the organization, but how might we think about that? Is it still relevant? Like, do you even have thoughts about that you can share?
Yeah, I know, obviously, all the people who are on the board still, and the new chair that's coming up in April is going to be Brindis Roberts, who was one of the founders.
Brindis is great.
Brindis is great. She's one of the founders of FemWalk, as well as she
That's
contributes...
Feminist Mormon Women of Color,
Feminist Women Mormon of Color, which is a great blog, and then also involved in Feminist Mormon Housewives, as well as Ordain Women. She's very engaged. When she started as part of Ordain Women, she was the Relief Society president in her ward in Atlanta, Georgia, and they released her. And so Brindis is amazing, and I think has a lot to bring to Ordain Women. I think it's just a really tough spot. Like, I would say we were in like the zenith of like hope. Like, when you interviewed me before, it was like everything's going to change, and like I have faith in the institution to do the right thing and all that. And then the church really took that away. It was kind of this cat, it was what's the game? When you drive at each other? Chicken. Yeah, I was like, it's an animal name. So it was like a game of chicken. Who's gonna peel off first? And then we just kind of collided because like neither of us was gonna peel off. And so I think the church revealed itself for what it is. I think a lot of people had hope, like it's not like the 90s anymore. The internet exists. And so
they've stopped excommunicating people.
They've stopped excommunicating people. It's fine.
Yeah.
And I was one of those people. I really thought that things were different now. And the church proved itself to not be the institution that we hoped it would be. And that's true of, that's true of feminist issues. That's true of LGBTQIA issues. That's true of like the way that they're interacting with people of color. So it's true across the board in the various oppressions that they propagate. And I think it's just the more and more we find out and the more candor that they use, the more we realize, like, okay, this is what we're dealing with. Like, this is the institution that we have to change. And so I think even the institution, like the perception of the institution that we have to change has changed in the last 2 years. And so the board of Ordain Women now is in a really tough place where people are beaten down. People are, just because of, for example, the policy on children of gay parents in the church, like so many people feel really, really beleaguered. And that's a difficult place. It's not the place that we were in before where everyone was like, hope, change,
hopeful.
Yay.
Yeah.
And so they're in a really tough spot, but also the unique contribution of Ordain Women is like we are Mormon people who are staking our claim to our Mormonism and saying that the institution should change. So it's hard for me as an outsider now to say like, oh, whatever, like, I'm on the outside of the church, they excommunicated me, I have no investment in the institution. And it's easy for me to criticize and say, well, you should do this, you should do this, you should do this, but I don't teach Sunday school. I don't go, I'm not a primary teacher. I don't go visiting teaching. I don't do the things that a lot of the people involved in the organization still do. And so I think that's the struggle that it's in right now is like when we've been so just treated so violently and so poorly by the institution we're trying to affect, where do we go? Like, what do we do from here? How can we raise our voice but still participate in an institution that we've been so wronged by? So it's tough. I think they haven't gotten as much attention, and there's a lot of reasons for that. Again, I think personally that the organization should be more confrontational. But again, I don't have to show up. I don't pay tithing. I don't, my family isn't involved in the institution anymore.
Yeah. Well, we wish them lots of success, and they are in a tough spot.
You just have to keep poking, as long as you're just annoyed, as long as you're just like pestering the patriarchy infinitely, I think you're doing a great thing. They're not going away. They're still doing actions. They're still accepting profiles. They're still poking. They're still prodding. And I think that is valuable. Even if it's not on the cover of the New York Times, like the work that they're doing is extremely valuable.
Well, we wish them all the best.
Yeah, I'm just glad I don't have to do it.
Go Ordain Women. So just kind of a wrapping up this little segment. Like, when you look back, I'm not sensing from you a lot of kind of nostalgia or sadness. And I honestly, like, picture you in those t-shirts with your BYU t-shirt and your like pom-poms sort of, I think of you as such a Mormon girl. Like, it's a little weird to not have you kind of in a misty-eyed kind of teary way talk about how you're sad or you wish, it kind of feels like emotionally you've moved on.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
I wouldn't have expected that.
Oh really?
Yeah.
I don't know. It's been a couple years.
Yeah.
And I think, again, I think I left in a way that was very, a lot of Mormon people who leave have this, long, drawn-out, angst-ridden, years-long process.
I know a little bit about that.
And I was, gung-ho until I wasn't. And then I was out.
Yeah.
And so I was, pretty happy up until the end. And then I was like, well, I did what I could, and the organization proved itself to be fundamentally misogynistic, and I don't think I did anything wrong. And so I just had it was like ripping off a Band-Aid. Some people are plucking that Band-Aid off one tiny millimeter at a time.
1 hair at a time, yeah.
And I was just fully ripped off. It wasn't ripped off by someone else ripped it off. Yeah. It wasn't my choice to leave the church, but once I did, it was a pretty clean break. And also, I'm just a person who integrates new ideas, and I'm a very process-oriented person. I never was a goal-oriented person. I never was in Young Women's, they do personal progress. I always hated personal progress. I thought it was just ridiculous. I didn't like doing goals. I didn't like keeping a journal. I didn't like doing all these things. I like to learn through the process. And so the process took me to a place where I had absolutely no loyalty to the institution. I liked my mission. I loved my experiences. I loved going to BYU. I still tell people I think it's a good school to go to for certain things and for certain reasons. But I have almost no nostalgia for Mormonism, and I think part of the reason is also that I have a very supportive family. So I don't have anyone luring me back in. I don't have anyone telling me oh, you should come to church with us. Oh, will you say the prayer? Oh, well, we're going to give a blessing now. You're in the room. I don't have anyone putting that on me, and a lot of people do. And so I think that's another way that I had a quicker transition out than a lot of people. So my parents also left the church. 2 of my brothers are not active, and then I only have one sister who is.
So one member of your family remains active.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. A lot of us wondered whether after our excommunications, if the excommunications would continue. It looks like they are. Just talk briefly about your reflections on that process.
Well, I didn't attend my trial, so it was a little different for me. I submitted a written defense. And so I think it would have been much different if I had gone. I had already moved out of the ward where it took place, and they wanted me to fly back. I'm like, yeah, no thanks. Thanks, but no thanks. And so I didn't go. It was also really quick. It wasn't this long, we had multiple meetings and we had a back and forth. I literally met with them twice, once in December, once right before I moved. And then they sent me emails from there on out.
Yeah.
My excommunication letter I received via email. And so it was, the process is just so absurd anyways. It's a kangaroo court. In the case of women, there's only 3 people as opposed to men, where there's 15. No one speaks for you. The whole thing was a total sham. And so... What
about how you experienced it being in the public eye and sort of the scarlet letter, so to speak?
It's funny because, I would say in Mormonism I'm pretty infamous, and fewer and fewer people recognize me, etc. As time goes by. But when you hold a certain a place in the zeitgeist of a certain era or a certain community or a certain place, people have really high expectations of you, but also feel very they have an invitation to also criticize you. And so, I never said I'm perfect. I never said I'm a perfect feminist. I never said I'm a perfect person. But anything that I did that people disagreed with, they really felt like they should tell me, or tell other people on the World Wide Web.
Like Laptop Gate, right?
Oh God, that was really something.
She tried to raise money for a laptop once, and the world fell apart, basically.
That really did. In fact, Laptop Gate, which I did a fundraiser on my personal Facebook page with my friends and family, people tried to insert that into my Wikipedia page, and it was one of the most debated things I've ever seen on Wikipedia. In the back, yeah, we should tell the world about this scandal. And I'm like, well, if that's my scandal, then all right. If that's the grand scandal of my life. I think that raising money from my family and friends that is totally not compulsory. I think it's probably fine. But it does, I say that very glibly, and I say that I think the reason that a lot of people don't think that negatively impacts me is I'm a pretty buoyant person. I have a pretty cheerful personality. I can move on from things. I'm also smart and articulate. And so I think, but it does affect you. It does wear you down. I remember during what we affectionately call Laptop Gate, I was in New York City, and I'd never experienced an anxiety attack before. And I never had any mental health issues of any kind. So it was hard for me to sympathize with people with depression and anxiety issues. And I had an anxiety attack. And it was, I didn't even know what it was. It's very hard to describe if you've never experienced it before. But it feels because you're so anxious, it feels like you're gonna die. I thought I was walking down the streets of New York City, I thought I was gonna die. And I was explaining to my husband at the time, I'm I can't explain it. I just feel like I'm gonna die. It's just a pressure it's crushing me mentally. And that was for a lot of reasons. A lot of things were happening. But I think I understand why cyberbullying and all these other things are so important to talk about and so important to try to eliminate, because it really can hurt people.
It was that more traumatic than your actual excommunication in some ways?
Yeah, yes, because...
Why?
Because the villain...
Can I just say, white men raise thousands of dollars for themselves, myself included, right? To support my family or whatever.
Right.
A woman asks for $500 for a laptop.
The internet breaks.
Really, I remember it's a really unfair standard, right?
You particularly reached out to me and you were like, tell people how much money I make. Tell them it's unfair that they're criticizing you and not criticizing me. And I really appreciated that, but I'm like, I'm having an anxiety attack. Nothing you say can help me. And so, but I think the reason, not that in particular, that was one day of my life. And it was really bad, but I think the reason in my excommunication, the villains were very clear, and I expected what they did to me. They were the villains, and they did this bad thing, and they're part of the patriarchy, and of course they're going to do what they're going to do. I didn't think in the end that they actually were going to excommunicate me, but it wasn't totally unexpected. It was part of the script. But when people who you think should be your allies, who you expect to have your back, don't, it's very, very hurtful. So when random haters on the internet, one guy used the hashtag #horriblehuman for me. That was his favorite hashtag on Twitter. People are insane on Twitter. I think we know this. So my hashtag is #horriblehuman. And I think from #horriblehuman, whatever, that's funny. Some person I don't know on the internet uses unintentionally hilarious hashtag. But when it's a feminist, or someone who I think should understand my plight, who I think should understand where I'm coming from, who should understand that it's actually really hard and difficult for women to be vulnerable and say I need something. I need whatever it is. I need this laptop for a million reasons. I'm going to Kenya and you can't buy them there, and I need it now because I'm flying out tomorrow and blah, 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 blah. Whatever the reasons are. It's actually one of my friends, Sarah Burlingham, who's part of FMH, she reached out to me. She's like, oh my God, I can't believe you did this. You never ask for help. You never show anyone that you're vulnerable. This is a really big deal. And so she saw it as a very positive thing. But then when you get criticism from people who should know better, who you expect to be in your corner, it's very, very hurtful.
It's hard, super hard.
Yeah.
When you're kicked out of the church, I think people expect you to be miserable and sad and dark and crazy, right? And talk a little bit about that. Do you feel happier, healthier? What is it? How would you describe sort of your level of joy and happiness and health right now, 2 years out of the church?
Well, I should do a lot more yoga than I do. But I think actually what people expect from you.
They say wickedness never was happiness.
I know. I think what people expect, not so much that you're not happy, because you could be happy, but that you're scary. Like, I remember, because I was on the other end of this coin not so long ago. Like, when we first started Ordain Women, we had a big debate, which I'm now very ashamed to tell, about whether or not Margaret Toscano should be allowed to submit a profile. Because she would be very I know. Hey, listen. I was a true believing Mormon at the time. You got to give me a break.
No.
And so I was the one who was saying no.
Wow.
I was saying no. She's going to unfairly stigmatize the organization. Like, this isn't for people like her. All these things, the common things. And honestly, I think I was just afraid of her. And obviously, that's why the church does that. That's what they want. They want people to be afraid of people who've excommunicated. They want to take away their platform. They want the most orthodox people who are very, very rule following to not listen to them. And so I had like a growing platform where very orthodox Mormons were listening to us, and they had to shut that down. And I've seen that work. In the ways that I was susceptible to that, the same thing happens to me. So I see when people meet me and are very nervous because they think I'm scary, or people will say, "Oh, you're like nicer than I thought you would be." And I'm like, I don't know why you thought I wouldn't be nice. But the church does a very good job of controlling the narrative about what excommunicants are and how scary or frightening or unhappy or miserable they are. And it's really hard to disprove a negative. So it's really hard to how do you combat, like, you're not happy? It's like, okay, well, I don't care what you think. Like, it's not my job to convince you that I am happy. But I think I am. It's a difficult transition, but the church also gave me like a very unique opportunity, an opportunity that not very many people have, to have like one day in their life where they're like, when you're faced with a choice, and the choice is everything you've known before or a principle that you believe in. And like, how many people have an opportunity to cross that divide? How many people have an opportunity to say, you know what? Like, women's rights is more important to me than social belonging and community and family and everything I've ever known and the entire way I've constructed my entire life. Like, not very many people have that opportunity. And so I'm grateful to the church for their candor and for revealing themselves to be what they are, which is very patriarchal and misogynistic, because it gave me this opportunity, it gave me this platform, it gave me like courage to be who I am now. And so, yeah, I think I'm pretty happy. I have good days and bad days. Sometimes I'm just really happy. Sometimes I'm like laying on the floor because I'm tired or sad. And I read an article about a Hindu goddess, and its goddess is called Never Not Broken. The goddess of being never not broken. And I think that's what I am. Like, that really resonates with me, because I'm never...
That's always broken, right?
Yeah, that's always broken.
Is that right? Is that...
Yeah, never not broken.
Yeah, okay.
But
so you're always broken, you're saying?
I'm always broken. And what that means to me is that I'm never set in one way of being. Like, I'm never like, this is how it's going to be for the rest of my life. This is how my trajectory is. And again, that goes back to being process-oriented. That goes back to being authentic as you can in the moment. That goes back to my general personality. But I think never not broken really leaves you open to new possibilities in a way that having a preconceived notion of how everything is going to turn out in your life before it happens, when you're, like 12 years old, you already know how your life is going to turn out. It's so much, it's far preferable, in my opinion. It opens things up. It's a little bit scary. Like, I know that human beings, not just Mormons, really like to have predictability. And I really like unpredictability. And so I just think I have a different, I don't know what it is. I have a different desire, but it's more rich, it's more full, it's difficult, but it's also, I don't know, it's hard to describe to Mormons. Like any Mormon listening to this would be like, yeah, it sounds like she's pretty unhappy.
Sounds like sin, basically.
I know. I'm like, it's wonderful to never not be broken. But I think it's hard to describe unless you've experienced it. But coming out of Mormonism, it opens up possibilities that you never thought were possible before. It makes you realize that things you thought before were absurd, so absurd. Like drinking for the first time. I've never talked about this before, so.
Here we go.
Guys.
Here we go.
Now all the Mormons who are listening to this are just going to be like solidly confirm that I have gone down the slippery slope, but I do occasionally drink. And I thought when the first time I ever had a drink of alcohol, I was with my former husband and my friend Jill, and we were on the beach in Kenya, and we decided like we're gonna do it. Like we're
gonna do
like,
it.
I didn't want to be with any like non-Mormons because I'm like 35 and they will not understand why I don't even know what alcohol is. And also I genuinely thought like I'm gonna take this one sip and like end up in a gutter after having an orgy, like, and becoming a cocaine addict, like. That was inevitable, obviously. And so I was just like, I did not know what was going to happen. Like, how do you know? So I took whatever, I had some like cocktail, and I took like, it was so hard to drink because if you don't have a palate for it, it's it's gross. It's just disgusting when you first taste it. It's like, oh, this is a really great juice drink with something really, really bad in it. And so it took me like probably an hour to drink the whole thing, and I'm just like prepared. Like, when is it going to happen? When is it going to happen? When is it going to happen? But of course, the longer you wait, the less effect the alcohol has. And it turns out it's actually really, you have to be committed to get drunk. You have to be really committed to the project, both monetarily and time-wise. You do not get drunk from one drink, even if you've never had anything before. My partner at the time, he had a drink, and we're like, oh, yours is good. Like, give me some more of that. Yum, yum, yum. So I kept drinking his. And then we're like, let's order another one of that. And we got the menu, and it turns out his was a virgin drink. So we're like, it's just juice. Like, that's why it was so good. And so you think all these things like, okay, you take one sip of alcohol and like your life will totally change and like it's gonna be like so crazy to be drunk. Like, no. Also, when you're having alcohol for the first time and you're 35, like you've got impulse control. You've got like financial concerns. You've got like you make like rational decisions. So you're not just like getting plastered. You just like occasionally socially drink. But it's just so funny, like, to think back to that time and think how it felt to be in that moment and just, like, take the sip of your destiny and then just be like, weren't. Wasn't that cool?
So, I mean, oddly enough, I still haven't tried alcohol. And part of that, you know, there are a lot of reasons for that, but part of it is I kind of feel like I carry this responsibility that there are these perceptions about post-Mormons,
totally.
right? The stereotypes
so
that they're going to do all these crazy
like,
bad things,
well,
right?
Even with my divorce, I was like holding out, and I didn't want to tell anyone because I'm like, I know this is going to like confirm all of their suspicions.
That was my question.
And I'm so mad. Like, I don't, like, of course, in the end, I was like, well, I certainly shouldn't be making life decisions on like really maintaining my facade for like, you know, active Mormons. But it's so frustrating. It's infuriating to know that the decisions that you make, no matter what you do, will confirm their preconceived notions about what it's like. So like, if I get divorced, if I stay married, if I drink, if I don't drink, if I do this, like whatever it is, they're gonna say, you see.
That's what happens.
That's what happens. That's what happens to people who are apostates. And like I work in Planned Parenthood now, so it's like I'm at the very bottom of the slippery slope.
So what do you want to? What are you comfortable sharing about Neil and kind of the divorce? Like,
So
You haven't spoken publicly about it, right?
No. The last Mormon Stories podcast I did was with Neil, who is a wonderful person and someone I really care a lot about. And so, and also is a very private person. Like, I had to convince him to do that Mormon Stories interview. Is a very private person. And so I prefer not to say anything about it just because I respect his privacy and autonomy, and he's someone I care about. But I can say that the reason I got divorced is not a reason, actually. There was no, it wasn't, he's a wonderful person. He is kind. He was extremely supportive. He's no longer involved in the church. He is a feminist. He supported Ordain Women. Like, he is just a really wonderful person. And so there isn't, it's really hard because people want to know, like, what happened behind the scenes. And it's hard to describe, and it's hard to tell people that there isn't like one thing that I can point to. I actually brought this because I was like, I bet he's going to ask about my divorce. I brought a book. It's called Tiny Beautiful Things by Cheryl Strayed, who's a feminist author and has like an advice column. And she explains it like in a way that I could never explain. Can I read it?
Yes, please.
Okay. So it says, there was nothing wrong with my ex. She's writing to women who have asked her questions about getting divorced. There's nothing wrong with my ex-husband. He wasn't perfect, but he was pretty close. But there was something in me was an awful thing from almost the very beginning, a small, clear voice that no matter what I did, would stop saying, go. Go even though you love him. Go even if he's kind and faithful and dear to you. Go even if he's your best friend and you're his. Go even if you can't imagine your life without him. And so she goes through and she says, because wanting to leave is enough. Get a pen and write that last sentence on your palm, all three of you, the women she's writing to, and then read it over and over again until your tears have washed it away. Doing what one wants to do because one has to do it is hard for a lot of people, but I think it's particularly hard for women. But an ethical, evolved life also entails telling the truth about oneself and living out that truth. All of the reasons are true enough in their specificity of like things that built up to her divorce, but they all boil down to the same thing. I had to leave because I wanted to.
Wow, that's powerful. And so un-Mormon in the sense of that's not how we're raised, right?
And that's not how everyone is. And so I think, a lot of people want to say, well, is that what you're telling everyone to do? Should everyone leave their spouses because they want to? No, but women should think about it in a different way. I think Mormons think about relationships in this weird, like, puritanical, like, it's like capitalism. You just, like, work hard, and in the end, it works out. Just like input X, vending machine, output, like, comes out the slot, and you have it. And so that's not how relationships work in my experience, not successful relationships. And so, yeah, I think you just need to think about it in a different way. If you want to leave, if you feel compelled to go, if you feel like that's a decision, you need to separate yourself from the culture and the environment and the teachings that you've been raised and make a decision for yourself. And that's hard, and it's easier for me because I don't have kids, and I am an attorney, and I have a lot of autonomy, and there's a lot of reasons why it's easier for me than for other women. But if you need to go, then you should, and you need to find the support to facilitate that. So I'm trying not to be opaque.
No, you're not being opaque at all. Here's my follow-up question. And so a pattern that I've noticed very common is you go through the faith crisis, you're married, you've got 3 or 4 kids, and you hit almost this early midlife crisis, because it often happens now in the 30s or early 40s. I went through this. It's where you have this sort of all your morality was tied to the church, at least it was for me, and all those decisions you made all along the way were sort of because you were following the plan. And, for some, it takes 5, 10, 15 years into a marriage, but at some point, maybe it's not as exciting as it was, maybe it's not as fun as you thought it'd be, but most importantly, you sort of look back and you say, wow, I just gave 30, 40 years of my life to something that turned out to be, for some, a fraud. And in some ways, what that can do for many is taint everything. It like pollutes who you're married to, it pollutes your children, it pollutes your life, and it makes you say, I don't know if I want any of this anymore. And then that's when people sort of sometimes just really come unglued. And you sort of go from having all these really solid beliefs and standards and values to saying, I don't know if I care about any of it. And it leads people to try all sorts of things, from infidelity to opening up the marriage to experimenting with drugs and alcohol to, are you pointing at me?
No, you were pointing at me, so.
I could be pointing at
I'm
me,
not a drug
pointing
addict,
at, pointing at
everyone.
all of us a little bit. But how do you know what to keep, right?
Yeah.
And it's not like leaving the church automatically means you're going to be happy and healthy. And people can make a lot of mistakes, right?
Yeah.
You can fall into some pretty dark holes. How do you make sense of all that?
It's really hard, but it's also exciting. So I think a lot of people are like, oh, wait, like my teen and 20s, and like I've only had sex with one person, and like, damn it, you know, like, why? And so, but it's because you're reevaluating, like it's like a rug is ripped out from underneath you, and then you're like, oh, the entire construction of my life is based around Mormonism. Like, I went to BYU, I went on a mission, I got married in the temple, I did this. For a lot of women, it's, I didn't get an education, I have 7 kids, I'm a stay-at-home mom, da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And then when the rug is ripped out from underneath you, you're really like bewildered, and what do I do now? You know, what is true, what isn't true, what do I still believe, you know, etc. And so for me, I called it my dismantle and rebuild phase. Where I had to really dismantle most things in my life in order to like select the things that I still believed in. And so it's not an easy phase for anyone. And for some it's quicker than others. But I think everyone goes through that, you know, adolescent period in their late 30s, and it's difficult. And especially when it involves things that are dangerous, like sex. You know, can be, if you don't know about consent and you don't know about contraception and you don't know how to have these conversations, and all of a sudden you're having sex with people, that can be dangerous. Or if you don't know about alcohol or drugs and you try those things, and it can really, it's weird because you're also like a professional and in your 30s and, you know, doing things that like teenagers do. For example, I have at least 2, probably more friends who basically got teen pregnant, but they were 28. And so... What
do you mean by that?
So it was like, they didn't know about contraception, they didn't know how to control it, they ended up like adopting out the baby. It was like it mirrored a situation like from 16 and Pregnant, the MTV show, but they were old and had like a master's degree and were very educated. It's just that the situation is such that we don't have a literacy in a very specific area. And so some things that most adults have eventually learned by the time they're 35, like more people leaving Mormonism don't know, or whenever they leave. And so that's really difficult. So I think a lot of people go through this pretty chaotic time. And again, I don't have kids, and I wasn't reliant on my partner financially. So for me, it wasn't as chaotic, but it is difficult. And I think, you know, a lot of people go through, I don't know, this is like taboo, but a lot of people go through a polyamorous phase. Which means they're just like, oh, damn it, I didn't, you know, like sleep with anyone else, but I'm married, but I still want to be married to you, but I also want to...
Don't want to wreck the family.
Don't want to wreck the family.
Don't want to disrupt the kids.
Also want to have sex with other people. And so that's actually really, really, really common.
No, like every major city where there's a critical mass of post-Mormons, there is a substantive percentage of those people that are experimenting with open marriage.
Totally, which I was shocked by. I was like, whoa.
We're talking Salt Lake, Utah County, Phoenix, Boise.
Well, also the
everywhere.
internet exists.
Yeah.
And so people, like when I announced that I was getting divorced, because I wasn't a man's property anymore, like a large number of post-Mormon men contacted me immediately, like literally like the day of. It was very creepy. And we're like, hey. I was like, okay, like let's not do this. And so it's just like, it's weird. It's very, very strange. And I hadn't experienced it, one, because I think I was pretty Pollyanna-ish, and also because I was married. And so no one had approached me, but it was pretty quick after I said that I was getting divorced that all these people, it was like, and this isn't just me, like this isn't me because it's me, this is like happens to a lot of feminist Mormons who leave the church.
And we're going to do a Mormon Stories episode on non-monogamy soon.
Yeah.
So, because it's huge.
It's such a big
It's
deal.
huge.
And I think, it's hard to navigate those roads. It's hard to know what's okay, what's not okay. I personally haven't been in a polyamorous relationship, but I understand why people think that they should try that. It's very, very, very hard to navigate polyamory. I've seen very few successful polyamorous relationships, but our tradition has like a pretty solid base in polyamorous relationships. I hate to break it to you guys.
It's so Mormon, right?
It's so Mormon. And so I think there is this edge of like, okay, that's not that weird, you know? Like we know that, for example, Joseph Smith, Brigham Young, like all of the early prophets did it. And so, yeah, it's this very strange thing where, but the thing is there's a lot of abuse too, like very, very predatory, progressive Mormon men who will approach women and try to gain their confidences through their feminism, which is just really repugnant in my opinion. And so it's important to know about it. It's important to think about it. It's important to like be aware of what's happening, even if you're not going to be involved. But yeah, it can be very, very hard.
And I mentioned a few cities, but the truth is it's everywhere, and it's not
everywhere.
just Mormonism. It's just, it's something in the 21st century that everyone's kind of confronting. As my Mormon self, I have to fight my tendency to sort of judge it and say, oh, that's bad,
Wrong.
or it's immoral, or it's
Yep.
wrong. So that's, and I don't want to be that way. Like if people find joy and meaning in a way that's healthy and sustainable for them, I want to say, who am I to judge? On the one hand. On the other hand, I've talked to a lot of friends who have either been a part of this or have sort of known a lot of people who have been friends with people who have been a part of it. And there's sort of this perception that, you know, polyamory is kind of what you do right before you get divorced. Like it usually ends badly, like it's super complicated. And
It's another slippery slope.
yeah, so I mean, I guess I'm not expecting you to sort of be the authority on this, especially since you say you've never even been a part of it, but...
I think like the thing that I've observed is that the reason it can be like a gateway drug to divorce, so to speak, is because a lot of those relationships are ending anyways. And so it's this transition of like, I'm tied to you and I married you for eternity.
And they're probably ending for the same reason yours ended, right? In the
Right.
sense that people say, I would have made very different decisions if I hadn't have been on this Mormon plan.
Right, yeah.
And it's like, this isn't working. Now that the church isn't there, it isn't working anymore.
Well, it's the biggest thing we had in common, you know? And so, like, we met at BYU, like, we did all these things. And so people are reimagining what their lives look like now that neither of them or one of them is involved in the church. And so it's really hard to reevaluate that. But the first step is, okay, maybe we should just have relationships with other people and see how that works. And then, I don't know, this is my personal opinion, I don't think, I haven't seen a lot of very successful, healthy polyamorous relationships. And so I see it more as like a transition phase, but it's hard. It's hard to know, like, is it right? Is it not right? Is everything Mormonism taught you wrong? Are some things wrong? You know, and I am in a monogamous relationship now, but I don't know. It's hard.
It's hard. And really, we don't have good data. We're all speaking anecdotally. A lot of people in these sorts of relationships just don't want to talk about it. They don't want to be honest in scientific studies. And so we shouldn't even necessarily create the impression that we know that they're rarely successful. We kind of don't know, but we're going to have to start learning about it because I think it's,
Well,
I
and
mean,
people
it's reached people very close to me.
I would also say, even if you do it like anonymously or however, I think people need to talk about it. Like the thing that annoyed me is I was like, whoa, like so many people are involved in this and no one talks about it. Like once I was separating, people were like, oh yeah, this, that, blah, 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 blah. You know, people started talking about it and I was like, what? I had no idea.
Yeah.
Like I had no idea because no one ever talks about it.
Yeah.
And honestly, I just get sick of being the only one who talks about hard things.
Yeah.
And so I'm like,
Well, not the only one.
Not the only one, but like, you talk about this.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? Like talk about it publicly. Let people know that this is like a struggle or this is something that people do. And so I understand it's like really, 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 really negatively stigmatized, etc. So yeah.
So let's talk about sex. What? Ooh, I got some cheers. Yeah, that's what you've been waiting for, right? That's what they came for.
We put it in the title.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, Periscope. I'm getting lots of hearts right now.
Okay.
Hi, Periscope. So what are some basics about healthy sexuality that someone even in their 40s or 50s in Mormonism might not know? Give us some healthy sexuality 101 for the people in or coming out of Mormonism. Are there some basics?
Okay, so to be clear, I'm an attorney, not a sex educator, although I do work for Planned Parenthood. And I think for Mormons, like the biggest thing for me is understanding about consent. Like it's very, very basic, but also really important. And the reason that it's so hard for Mormon people or post-Mormon people, I think, is because it requires like a really tough, or it just requires a conversation. And so it's talking about something that you're not used to talking about. It's talking about with someone you might not have a really long relationship with. It might be someone you just met. It might be someone that you've dated for a short amount of time. It's not someone you've been married to for 10 years, for example. And so it requires like difficult conversations. It requires a lot of candor. And so, yeah, consent is a really tough issue for Mormonism. And when I say consent, I mean that both people or all people involved in a sexual interaction have expressly consented to participating in that interaction. Just because you consent one time doesn't mean that you're consenting for the next time. Just because you're consenting to one thing doesn't mean that you're obligated to do it again. It's kind of like a continual conversation. And the hardest thing, I think, I don't know what you guys think, for Mormons to talk about is sex. Harder than any sort of substance, harder than any other subject is to talk about sex, and that's very much how I was raised. I can remember even a few years back when people were having conversations about sex, and I would basically like opt out. Like if there was like an opt out button on the conversation, I would just be like, okay, no, thank you, because it's really, I don't know, the way that we're raised, it's very heavily stigmatized. It's like, no, don't do this, don't touch yourself, that's bad, blah, 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 blah. Like if you do anything, you have to talk to your bishop, who is an old man who will shame you in private when you're a young woman. Like, that seems unhealthy. And so you have all these like super negative experiences, and then you get married, and you're like, all right, now it's going to be wonderful. and then it's not. Or maybe it is for some people. But for me, I talked about this on Feminist Mormon Housewives podcast, but for me, I had like so much buildup and so much trauma and so much like negative teaching that I literally spent my honeymoon like crying in the bathtub. Like I just could not, like you can't switch it off and on like that. And so it's very difficult to have those conversations. So now, ironically, I work at Planned Parenthood, and basically like every staff meeting we're like talking about vasectomies and talking about like all kinds of sex and how to promote safe sex. And I think it really starts in Mormonism with learning how to have those conversations, and that's hard.
Yeah, when you talk about consent, like why, and this is going to sound maybe naive or ignorant, but why is that number one, why is that such an important topic to talk about? Mm-hmm. When can that go wrong, or when is that essential? But also, isn't that kind of a mood killer? I'm intentionally being sort of a little bit offensive or stereotypical, but I mean that. I think it's important to kind of address it at that level, because I think there's a lot of people that are like, what, consent?
Yeah. So it really depends on the type of relationship that you're in and the communication that you have with your partner. I think the reason it's so important is like so much non-consensual sex is happening, where it's like, oh, we didn't really talk about it, but I thought she was cool with it, and then, we did it, and then it was terrible or something bad happened, or there's just or we just didn't have a conversation about it.
She calls it rape or he calls it rape, right?
Yeah, and I'm not even talking about like the legal definition of sexual assault. I'm just talking about a conversation or an interaction where both people don't feel like fully invested in it and good about it. And so yes, it is a conversation, and it is something that has to continually happen. But the reason that you might say like, oh, that's a buzzkill or that's difficult is because that's not the way we were raised. Like some people, it's like very much like in queer culture, for example, a lot of times, like a lot of my queer friends are like, this is just part of the interaction. Like, of course you're going to have, you're going to talk about STIs. You're going to talk about interactions. You're going to talk about what's
Tell us what STIs are.
Sexually transmitted infections. It's the newer term. STDs is an older term because diseases are incurable, and a lot of infections like chlamydia, for example, is just an infection and it's curable. So it's to destigmatize what is an STI. And so up at the legislature, I'm always like, STIs, blah, blah, blah. They're like, STIs, what's STI? So that's what it is. And so like those are important conversations. Like when you think about it, like that's like a life or death situation. Like if you're having sex, unprotected sex, particularly with someone who has an STI, like you could die from that interaction. Like you could contract a disease that will lead to your eventual death. So you'd think that would be worth having a conversation about, or you could get pregnant. Unintended pregnancies are difficult to deal with. And so it's important. It's one of the most important things to have a conversation about, but it's one of the most difficult things to have a conversation about. And I will say that from my personal experience. Again, I'm always like railing on people who won't talk about things. So it's hard. It's hard for me. Like I have sex with my partner now, and it's even.
Wait, what?
Yep, guys. I drink and I have sex. Again, I'm at the bottom of the slippery slope. So yes, I have a sexual relationship with my partner. His name is Jack, and he's here.
Hi, Jack. Let's give Jack a hand, everybody.
He also blushes really easily, so he's probably blushing right now. But but it's a continual conversation that we have to have because we were both raised Mormon, and we both have a lot of like negative socialization around sex, and so it's hard. It's not hard. It's just you have to work through it, and like you have to have these conversations. You have to talk about things. You have to say. You have to ask questions. You have to, like, especially for a Mormon woman, and I think almost every Mormon woman can sympathize with me on this fact. If you were raised Mormon, it is very difficult to articulate your desire. Like, very difficult to say, like, I want this. Because what you've been raised to be is very deferential, to give other people what they want, to serve other people, to put other people's needs before your own at all costs. Like your children, your husband, like the church. You're not supposed to be in a leadership position. You're not supposed to speak up. You're not supposed to do these things. So like our entire socialization, like people think of me as like this very brave, brash person, which I think is so funny because I don't think of myself as that at all. Like every time I do a protest and I'm like leading a group of people, I'm just like having this internal dialogue of like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. But I can't say that because I'm in the front. So I'm just like, sally forth, everyone. Don't worry, we'll be fine.
What do the voices inside say? I'm just curious.
Just like, we're not supposed to do this. Like, the first Ordain Women action, I was like, this is just, it's so taboo. Like it's almost like my primal instincts are like, don't do this. He's in charge. Like, you should listen to him.
What about, am I worthy enough? Am I...
Yeah, are they going to listen to me? Is this okay? I'm breaking the rules. I'm breaking the rules. I'm
breaking
the rules. Like, I am a real rule follower, ironically. Like, I'm very, like, unless a rule is wrong, and then I think the rule should be changed. And so, like, I remember following rules. Woo! I remember a BBC reporter was interviewing me, and it was a radio, so she just had her little recorder, and we were going to Temple Square, and I'm like sitting on the sidewalk, and it's like like I'm just waiting, and then it's like the green man, and then I go. But there's no cars, not for like 20 miles. There's like no cars, no people. Like I easily could have gone, and she's like, this is so funny to me. And I'm like, what? She's like, you just waited for like 2 minutes when no cars were coming, just because like there was no sign that said you could go. And I was like, yeah, I'm actually quite a rule follower. And so I think all of that socialization builds up, combined with our negative socialization on sex, that makes those conversations hard. But you just have to break through it. You have to like figure out ways to have those conversations. Like a lot of times, and this may sound very cowardly, a lot of times like I'll say things about sex in text messages because it's hard for me to like have that conversation in the moment or have that conversation in person. It's like a little bit hard. And so sometimes like the hardest things to say, I will say by text. And Jack's like, should we be having this conversation by text? But I think whatever it takes to get through that, whatever it takes to like get to a place where you feel comfortable, where you can talk about things, where you can talk about contraception, where you can talk about all these different things. You know, I have an IUD, which is a 10-year-long birth control. I have a copper IUD, which is the best. IUDs are the greatest. I'm like an IUD missionary. There's also a hormonal IUD that you can get, so it's semi-permanent birth control. You can have it removed if you want to become pregnant. And so, you know, there's just like different layers of conversation, and it has to be an ongoing conversation. It's not just like, oh, we talked about that, so we're good. And that's why consent is so important to talk about.
But it doesn't have to be a mood killer.
I don't think so. Again, like you can talk about it at any time. You can like, when you feel safe, when you feel like it's appropriate, you can.
I can imagine actually enhancing a relationship.
Yeah, because part of a relationship is having that conversation. And Mormons like don't talk about sex issues. So for a lot of Mormons, like I remember one of the Mormon therapists, like sex therapists, has a list about like couple, like intimacy or something like that. And she accidentally sent an email to everyone without BCCing. And I was like, oh, that's probably like a breach of whatever, confidentiality. But also I was like, oh, that person? Oh, that person? Oh, they're all, like everyone I know is on that list, you know? And it's because everyone I know is having the same issues. we're all messed up in the same ways. And so we have that commonality. So it's not just you, it's not just your partner, it's not just your marriage, like it's everyone, man. And it's not just Mormons either. It's a hard topic because of the puritanical culture that we're raised in. And so, yeah, it's everyone. Like, don't think you're the only one.
And a super obvious question, does consent apply to married people? And how does?
Oh,
how does it?
Okay, thank you for asking that
Sure.
question. Consent does apply to married people. There is such a thing as marital rape in most states. There was a legislator last year in Utah who made this major gaffe, but at the legislature, they never think they're making a gaffe. They're just like, I feel totally unashamed to say something super crazy because no one is going to call me on it. But this legislator said that it was appropriate to have sex with your wife if she was unconscious. And just FYI, that is not appropriate. Also, what circumstance is that occurring in? Like, I'm unclear. So no one asked a follow-up question. But yeah, it's very, very important, I think, in marriage. And a lot of, for example, men might think, oh, you did that once, and so you're going to be okay with doing that again. Or like, just because whatever. Or they might try anal sex when you haven't consented to that and you don't want to. Or it can just lead to a lot of like problems. And so it's very important in marriage. It's very important to a healthy marriage. And especially if you have multiple partners. If you
just point at me?
No.
You just pointed at me.
If you have multiple partners.
One partner.
John has one partner, to be clear. Internet. Do not get mad at John.
Margie, do not get mad.
She's awesome. So yeah, I think it's hard to talk about. And like, I don't know, even again, if you know the mechanics of things, like you're in your 30s, you understand what a condom is, and you understand how to put it on, because you like saw the video. If you live in Utah, you did not ever see condom demonstration in school. We do not have comprehensive sex ed, but you know they exist. But you might not know how to use them. And again, I think personally that the most difficult part of this interaction is like how to have a conversation about like, okay, now we put the condom on. And so that's hard. So I have safe sex kits here if anyone wants to get one and try one, even if you're married, just to know what they're for. It has lube and condoms and dental dams, which
dental what?
It's called a dental dam. It prevents STIs when you have oral sex. So you can also turn a condom into a dental dam. If you just have a condom, you can just cut it into a square. So if anyone has more specific questions, I can answer them after.
Get a little uncomfortable here.
But it's something you can know the information, like you can know the science, you can know the information, you can know the body parts, you can like have taken anatomy, you can be an educated person and still not know how to have those conversations, and still have unprotected sex even though you know it's dangerous, and still not have conversations with your partner about things that are important to you. It's hard. It's a process, but it's also beautiful. Like I think you're right. Like having those kinds of conversations make it more intimate. Like I think it makes sex much more beautiful.
Let's talk about Planned Parenthood. So much of the perception around Planned Parenthood has to do with abortion. So just give us a primer on what Planned Parenthood is.
Okay.
And then let's talk about Abortion 101, like why that's such a issue of importance for you and for women. Okay.
So Planned Parenthood is an organization that provides basic reproductive health care services for women and men. In Utah, that's 15% men. So we do vasectomies, we do STI treatment.
You can get a vasectomy at Planned Parenthood?
Yes, you can.
Wow.
Planned Parenthood Association of Utah for
Is
very low cost.
Is it like discounted? Or?
Yeah, it's discounted. We actually
I have no idea.
We have a very.
Did you guys know that?
Guys, get vasectomies.
Somebody go, woo! Woo! Vasectomies! Yeah! Rock and roll.
I think it's very important for men to take control of
vasectomies.
Vasectomy is actually a minimally invasive procedure that
I've had a vasectomy.
You what?
Well, it's time for disclosure. I've had a vasectomy.
Ah, great.
We have to get comfortable. Thank you. Thank you very much.
I applaud you for taking control of your reproductive life. Actually, we have a big wait list for vasectomies because it's like very low cost at Planned Parenthood. It's like a very popular procedure. So yeah, vasectomies.com. But I think the misperception about Planned Parenthood is that we only do abortions, or a large percentage. Abortion is a very important part of reproductive health care and is safe and legal, and we provide those and have provided them in Utah for 40 years. However, it's a pretty small percentage of what we actually do. So we do education. We have in Utah we have a teen council. So we do sex ed to teens, and those teens do peer education. So they'll go to high schools, they'll go to middle schools, they'll reach out to other groups. They can do, they teach other teens and adults about sex. And these teens are actually really cool teens. They know a lot more about sex than a lot of adults in Utah do. And so it's, we do education programs. We do, like I said, we do cancer screenings, we do STI screenings, we do well woman exams. We do like a really full range of sliding scale services. So if healthcare were like Planned Parenthood for all healthcare, it would basically be single payer healthcare, but we only focus on reproductive services. And so we'll do pregnancy tests. We refer people, that we will counsel them on their options. We refer to adoption agencies if that's what the pregnant person wants to do. If they want to carry the child to term, then we could refer them to an OBGYN. We do not, we don't have those services. And then also termination.
If somebody were to accuse you guys of nudging people towards the abortion, what would you say in response to that?
Those people should just come to the clinic. You can do.
How are people trained in terms of neutrality?
So yeah, it's actually very open. They discuss all the options, and then it's values neutral, and so they let the woman indicate what she wants to do. It's a novel concept.
Wait, what?
Yeah, what? And so nobody is pro-abortion. Literally 0 people on earth are more abortions. It's a necessary healthcare service. It's important for women to be able to terminate their pregnancy if they so choose, and that's why we provide them. Planned Parenthood in Utah actually didn't used to provide abortion services, but there was a really terrible bill in 2010 that said that abortion providers had to sign a specific registry that they're an abortionist and provide their public information. So basically really negatively stigmatizes abortion care providers. So it went from 10 or 12 all the way down to 1, and then Planned Parenthood stepped in and started performing them because there was no one else doing them. So Yeah.
So this is like really basic, but
Yeah.
somebody's saying you're killing babies and the baby has the right to life and you know you shouldn't be making that decision for the unborn. What is your response to all that?
Well, I would start with the vast majority, 90+% of abortion care takes place in the first trimester. So we're not talking about a baby, we're talking about a fetus or an embryo or a fertilized egg.
Some would say that's just a way to depersonalize things.
Well, I would say that the opposite is trying to anthropomorphize something that is not actually an unborn child. And so
That was fast.
What?
That was good.
And so I think it's important to step back if you do consider abortion to be quote unquote murder, to step back and think about what is real. What is real is that the woman who is pregnant is here, can feel, can think, can make decisions about her body, and should be able to do that. And again, we're talking about a fetus, and so and most of the procedures take place pretty early in the pregnancy. I think there was a bill up at the Utah State Legislature about abortions taking place after 20 weeks, and it's something like 17 abortions took place in Utah after 20 weeks in a year.
In a year.
So it's rare. It's super rare. It's a handful of people. Most people, and those circumstances a lot of them are very dire. You didn't find out you're pregnant. You didn't find out there was a fetal anomaly. Rape, gang rape, or a young girl who wasn't able to report because of sexual abuse. Like, there's a lot of reasons that you might wait until later in the pregnancy, but a lot of them create like really high risk or dire situations. So that needs to be available to those women. I think very few people, even the most quote unquote pro-life people, would say that a 13-year-old who's gang raped should have to carry the pregnancy to term. And so, I think, of course, that women should be able to choose whether or not to terminate a pregnancy on their own with no restrictions, because it's an important part of our lives. And then there's all these laws, and because Roe versus Wade happened and it's legal in all 50 states, what the anti-choice movement has done now is try to put access limitations. So in Utah, there's a 72-hour wait period. If you're 18, you can't get an abortion without parental consent and notification when the procedure happens. The only way to get around that is if you get a judicial bypass. So as a teen girl, you have to go before a judge and convince them that your parents shouldn't know about your reproductive life. It's very cumbersome. There's also consent. So you have to have a consent session, which tells you about the procedure, and you have to wait for 72 hours. And there are only two places that provide abortion, like scheduled abortions in Utah. One is Planned Parenthood, which is in Salt Lake, and one is it's called Whole Women's Health Clinic. It's also in Salt Lake, but it's a tiny private clinic. So if you live in St. George, if you live in Hurricane, if you live in Logan, if you live in all these different places, like, you'll have to come far to have the procedure performed.
There's a Planned Parenthood in Logan, but it doesn't perform.
There's only one clinic in Utah, Planned Parenthood clinic, that performs abortions, and it's in Salt Lake. The Title X funding the federal funds cannot be used for any abortion care, and so it has to be a totally separate clinic. Like, abortions don't take place in all the clinics because it has to be separate funding.
And this is going to sound like a trope, but for those who say, hey, these women shouldn't have had sex if they didn't want to get pregnant, what do you say to that? Like, they should have thought of that before they had sex, right?
Yeah. I was at a hearing in the Senate, in the House at the Utah State Legislature yesterday, and someone said, and these pregnancies are all caused by the thing that you do that results in pregnancy. And I was like, also known as sex. So kind of amazing. But I think there's a lot of answers to that. One is not all sex is consensual. So a lot of people, even if they're with a partner or if they're in different situations, not all sex is consensual. Sexual assault exists, etc. But even if the people who are saying that think, and this is something a legislator said, that STIs and pregnancy are the natural result of a sin, and so we should not teach children how to have sex without consequences. So they think that they should legislate based on something they see as a sin, and this is a consequence of sin. That's just wrong. That's not true. If you think that, you should reevaluate that. Sex is a natural part of human relationships, and no matter how you think about it, that's fine. You do what you want to do, but that doesn't mean that I should have to be like legislatively prohibited from doing what I want to do. And Mormons believe in agency, like that's our thing. Like we really believe in that. And so I think if you believe in agency, if you believe that people should be able to choose, if you believe that you're on this planet because you're here to progress and make choices, that this is a choice that women should be able to make.
Got it. Okay. Can you share with us some stories of women's experiences that help illustrate why the access to abortion is really important?
Mm-hmm.
Just a few stories.
Yeah. Actually, we had a Roe versus Wade event in Salt Lake City where 6 women publicly told their stories, and those are going to be available on KRCL radio. So I'll send you the link so that people can listen to those stories because they're really interesting, and a lot of them were raised Mormon, the women who told the stories. One of them was a woman who was really heavily involved with a man who was very abusive. So when she told him that she was pregnant, he was in the car and he reached across and punched her in the face and broke her nose, and then started beating on her stomach. And she felt like she was not only in a, like, basically she explains her termination of her pregnancy not only, got her out of that relationship, it saved her life. And so that's a situation where, you have to choose between really hard options, but you have to be able to choose. And there are a million different circumstances why women might choose to terminate a pregnancy. Maybe they're in school. Maybe they are, also the majority of women who terminate pregnancies already have children, which is something not a lot of people know. They might have 2 kids already. They might have 3 kids already. They might have 7 kids already. And they just don't feel able to add another person to their family. So it might also be a question of survival of their family. And the thing that people don't understand about abortion is that criminalizing abortion doesn't stop it. Like, it's going to happen.
It's like prohibition in alcohol, right?
It's going to happen because some women are in such a desperate situation that they absolutely must terminate the pregnancy, that criminalizing it is not going to stop them. It's only going to make it unsafe, and it's going to make them, it's going to put them in danger for being criminalized or for being imprisoned. I just learned this today, that one of the highest search terms, like you can see the search terms that people search to find your website, and one of the highest search terms to find our website is DIY abortion.
Do-it-yourself abortion.
Do-it-yourself abortion. And that's because it's so heavily stigmatized, because women have to go so far, because there's so many barriers. Like, women are in such a state of desperation that they will, not terminating the pregnancy is not an option. And so they have to do something that's dangerous. They have to do something that's just absolutely nobody should ever have to do. I really recommend for anyone who is thinking about this issue and wants to know more, there's a really good film. It's called Trapped. It's about laws that are called trap laws. They're targeted regulations against abortion providers. And so the film is going to be screened in Utah in May. And I can send you the link to that too, but it really gives some really concrete examples and stories of women. One of them was a girl who was 13 who was gang raped in Texas, had to drive 7 hours to try to get the abortion terminated, but because of the situation, they weren't able to get a doctor in, and so she couldn't do it. They told her she would have to go to New Mexico and pay $5,000 and a whole litany of blocks for her to get the abortion care she needed. And so in the end, what they were really telling her is, you have to carry this baby to term.
Yeah. It's probably worth noting that the LDS Church has an abortion policy, right?
So there are exceptions, and the LDS Church is actually picketed and protested by pro-life, extreme, anti-choice people, because their policy is too liberal. And so the one time the LDS Church is too liberal on something, And so there's exceptions for life of the mother, survival of the fetus, rape, incest, sort of the moral exceptions. But the problem is, I think, with the culture, that people don't see that as abortion. It's like, it's okay, it's morally allowable, it's morally permissible for this woman to terminate it, but not this woman. So like, who gets to make that judgment? Who gets to decide who is able to access this healthcare and who isn't? And I really don't think it should be 15 men in Salt Lake City. I honestly don't think they should be making decisions about any woman's life under any circumstances. But it certainly shouldn't be men. And so, yeah, I think it's very, very, very important that we keep this accessible, and we will. I mean, it's the law of the land.
What would you say if somebody said, these barriers that they put up to make it difficult, that like it's kind of a serious decision and it merits it merits whatever structures need to be put in place to ensure that this is a careful, thoughtful decision that the person isn't going to regret later, and that it's done in a way that isn't sort of disrespectful to life. What would you say about someone who said, yeah, a few barriers or some structure is good to make sure it's not done carelessly?
Well, that's really implying a lot of things, and one of them is that women who choose to get abortions are not responsible decision makers, which is just really fundamentally insulting and untrue. I think also that implies that the people that should be making medical decisions are not doctors and their patients. They are politicians or church leaders or other people. The people who should be making those decisions are doctors and their patients, and that's it. And so if you say, oh, well, it's really serious, you should take that seriously. Yeah, so is a colonoscopy. Like, more people die from getting a colonoscopy than from terminating a pregnancy, but no one's like, let's give them 72 hours on that. They really need to think that through. Or any other medical procedure. Like, what other medical procedure can you think of that people have to like sit back, get a consent form, have a session, wait for 72 hours, like travel 600 miles, et cetera,
get their parents' permission.
Get their parents' permission. Yeah. Like, is there any other medical procedure where that's the case? No. The point of the roadblocks to abortion care is not to make sure it's safe or to care for the unborn child. The point is to negatively stigmatize a procedure which people morally oppose. And so they want to put their judgment on it, they want to stigmatize it, they want to make women feel bad, they want to make them feel like murderers and compare it to a crime. When it is safe, it is legal, and it's actually one of the safest procedures. So it's like a very, very small percentage of people who terminate their pregnancies have any complications. There's also a medical abortion. I didn't know about this, maybe other people do, but you can actually terminate a pregnancy within the first 9 weeks by taking a pill. So there's no invasive procedure. Because of laws, you have to take them at the clinic. But you can take a pill, then you take another one the next day. It's a series of pills, and then you terminate the pregnancy. So it's actually not even a surgery.
What would you say, let's sort of take it to the other extreme, if you were to learn about a young woman who just liked to have sex a lot but didn't like contraception, and so she, as an extreme example, used abortion as just her form of birth control? Would you be opposed to that? Would you say that's, not right?
Okay. Well, first of all forms of birth control are I think, important to access, but also that's another way to stigmatize it. Like, you're making a bad choice as opposed to any other point. Like, if you use Plan B, is that bad? Plan B is something you can take. It's called emergency contraception. And you can take it the day after.
That's the morning after.
It's the morning after. It's within 72 hours. And so is that wrong? At what stage does another person get to decide what you're doing is wrong? There are very few people who are just like, this is awesome. Like, I want to do this thing that's pretty, like, time consuming and expensive and emotionally difficult because everyone is judging me and all these other things. Like, people aren't using, that's just basically a myth. Like, people are not using abortion as birth control. But if you don't have sex ed, if you don't know how things work, if you haven't been raised to have these conversations, and you don't have access to free or affordable contraception, then that makes it more likely that you will have to terminate a pregnancy. I think what Planned Parenthood does, actually, I'm like a Planned Parenthood missionary. What Planned Parenthood and other organizations that provide education and access to contraception do is prevent anyone from having to terminate a pregnancy. Like if you have an IUD and you know how to have sex in a way that keeps you safe, like you won't have to terminate a pregnancy because you won't, get pregnant. I've had an IUD since I got married. And of course I didn't have sex before I got married. And so I've never had to terminate a pregnancy. And so I think if people really strongly oppose abortion for fundamental moral reasons, they should donate money to Planned Parenthood, because we are the ones that are out there helping people understand how to prevent pregnancy and giving them the tools to do so.
Good. So this is going to be slightly repetitive, but if the Utah legislature or believing Mormons or whoever, or evangelicals, want to minimize the number of, fetuses that are, that are terminated, then they would invest in
Planned Parenthood.
Meaning what? You just said it, but I just want to make it really clear.
Yeah, I think.
What are the things that prevent unwanted, pregnancy?
I think it's very clear that the things that prevent unwanted pregnancy is not abstinence-only education. Abstinence-only education is
So sex ed, thumbs up.
Comprehensive sex ed. Comprehensive sex ed teaches about contraception and STIs, as well as condom demonstration. Condom demonstration has been very linked to preventing STIs and pregnancy. So you get not just like, this is a condom. Anyways, blah, 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 blah. Never have sex before you get married. That's essentially what Utah sex ed is. It's called Abstinence Plus. So you can say that STIs exist. You can say that contraception exists, but you can't demonstrate it. You can't advocate it. You're
talking pull out the banana, the whole deal?
Right. Just show kids how to use it.
Okay. That helps.
Yeah. It also does not cause kids to have sex because we've taught them how to have sex consequence-free. You can know about sex and still choose not to have it. A lot of kids who have comprehensive sex ed don't feel ready or, choose to wait. That's fine. But that doesn't mean that we should deprive children and, adolescents of information about their bodies. So comprehensive sex ed, also access to contraception. So a lot of people can't afford permanent contraception. For example, IUDs are expensive. It's a one-time cost that obviously lasts for 10 years. So in the end it pays off, but it's a high upfront cost. So any LARC, any long-acting contraception is expensive. So if people have access to that, vasectomy is also expensive. Or tubal ligations, etc. There are lots of options that are more permanent. There's also implants. So there are lots of ways to prevent pregnancy, but again, they have to be accessible. People have to be able to get those with their insurance or be able to afford them. And so I think a combination of accessibility to contraception and education, I know it's hard to use logic with Mormons, but it just makes logical sense. And so, yeah.
I don't want to put you on the spot. Didn't Colorado implement some sort of IUD program that had some pretty significantly positive results?
Yeah, so Colorado implemented a LARC program, which is basically IUDs and implants to provide them for free. And then I think their abortion rate went down by something like 60%. It was very, very steep dive. And also teen pregnancy. So their teen pregnancy rate also plummeted. Because they were providing this contraception. And we're also starting an IUD program in Utah. So if anyone's interested, they should check that out.
All right. Okay, I'm ready to open things up.
You thought it was going to be fun sex talk, not like a lecture.
That'll be the next interview. No, this is great. Anything you want to say about Planned Parenthood or sex or anything sort of before we open it up to questions?
I mean, I think for me, the main part is like many things post-Mormonism to understand that those can be they can be scary, these conversations can be scary, but also really enriching and pleasurable. And having these conversations also makes you feel like an adult. I feel like in Mormonism, a lot of times you don't feel like an adult. Even if you have kids, or especially if you don't have kids, if you don't have kids, you're sitting at the kids' table for the rest of your life. Even if you're married, especially if you're a woman. People would always comment how young I was. They're like, "Oh, you're so young." I'm like, "I'm not really that young, actually." I was invited to present on a youth panel, and I was 32, and had a JD, and I'm pretty solidly not youth at this point. but I didn't have any kids, so I was young. But I think these like it can make you can transition into a place where you like very much feel like an adult, very much feel more in control of your life, and sex can be like really beautiful and pleasurable and like a very enriching. I don't know. It's not like, okay, I feel like I'm sounding like soul symbols and sacraments right now. That's not where I'm trying to go. And I think like inserting God into sex is kind of creepy, honestly. Like, why is there this other mysterious man involved in this decision? But that's also where I am spiritually. So, but I think, yeah, I think it can just be like a beautiful experience. And so I want people to know that even if it's hard, like you can get there.
What's the website? Planned Parenthood?
So I think I will, one of the best places to go right now is proutah.org, and it's a new campaign we have, and there's several stories, including one from an active Mormon man who works for Planned Parenthood. And so, yeah, proutah.org.
Proutah.org. All right, questions for Kate Kelly?
Sorry, I took the mic. I wanted it first.
That's great.
So I want to be public about my name. My name is Diana Hanson Ribera, and I don't want to be closeted about being a full supporter of Planned Parenthood, Mormon Stories, anything that is controversial in Utah right now. And I say that because I have a semi-public family. And the question I want to ask is, as an eating disorder survivor and a convenient Mormon, which is I'm Mormon when the situation suits me, technically I'm Mormon, I would like to know what your thoughts are on the high rates of depression and eating disorders in Utah. And do you think that the shame that accompanies women and sex, especially premarital sex and being made forever unpure from premarital sex, contributes to poor body image and self-esteem in LDS women?
Love that question. Thank
Yes.
you, Diana.
I kind of just want to know what you think about it. But here I am. So I'll give my 2 cents, but I do want to know what you think about it, because I've never had an eating disorder, but I have friends who have. First thing, I think another person who said a lot of really great things about this is Elizabeth Smart. And she speaks out about this, and she gives the analogy, and she says, I didn't run away because I thought I was garbage. Like, I was chewed gum at that
She
point.
didn't run away from her captor, her kidnapper.
Yeah, she didn't run away from her.
Because she felt like she was garbage.
She didn't run away from her kidnapper who raped her every day.
Because he raped her.
Because she had been violated, and she had been taught. In Mormonism, we have these lessons where it's like they pass around a piece of gum and everyone like chews it, or that's gross. I don't know. Is that the thing? Or maybe everyone chews a piece of gum.
There's the licked cupcake.
Okay, there's the lick. We'll
you
go with
pass
the
around
cupcake.
the candy bar. There's the board of wood with the nail.
There's roses that are like the petals are ripped off.
You smash the rose.
Yeah, you smash the rose. Yep. So anyways, she had been given this object lesson. She said it was at school, and I'm like, okay, I don't think that was at school. I'm pretty sure that was at church. But she didn't feel like she could run away, and she didn't feel like it was worth it because she had already had sex, even though obviously she did not consent. And so I think I couldn't say it any better than she says it, that women should be taught that they have worth and value outside of their sexual relationships, and that anything that they have to contribute to society is not negatively impacted with how much sex they have. But I also think that it goes to your larger point of like what value are women in our society. My parents live in a ward in Provo, and in their Provo ward, it's like a lot of really wonderful people, but a lot of older women, like much older, who really only focus on like being super fit and like lots of plastic surgery. Utah in 2007 was named by Forbes magazine. Salt Lake City was named the most vain city in the United States of America because of per capita plastic surgeons. And so it's higher than LA, it's higher than other places here. And you can see that just driving down I-15. It's just huge amounts of pressure on women to conform to unnatural beauty standards. If someone wants to do that, that's fine. But it's hard when women are pressured into, like, the only way they can achieve a beauty standard is with invasive surgery. And so I think it all combines into one. And going back to these women who are in my parents' ward, I just wonder, like, man, they're like super tan all the time. And like, you can tell that the thing they invest the most time into is how they look. And I like fashion. I'm not against that. But it's sad to me because the underlying message is my value is and always has been how I look to men. And so and it's hard to separate
And what
those.
satisfaction I give to men.
Yeah, absolutely. And so it's hard to separate those things. It's hard to say like, well, I just like fashion, or like, I just like having big boobs. But it's so hard to separate those things in Mormonism because we've been so socialized. But it's tragic to me that you would have to have surgery, or you would have to like have disordered eating, or these different things, because our only value is how we look and how we can please or be attractive to men. And so that's just devastating. And I'll give like a tiny example that's not even remotely comparable to an eating disorder. But when I was studying for the bar in Utah, I would drive back and forth between Salt Lake and Provo a lot. And then one day I just randomly started doing, does anyone know what microdermabrasion is? Maybe you're in Utah, so you probably know what it is. But it's like this weird like thing where you like...
It's like sandblasting your skin,
It's sandblasting your face, basically. And my husband was like, why are you doing this? This is so weird. Like, this is so out of character. And I was like, I don't know. I just really feel like I should do it. And I realized that it was like driving back and forth and seeing all of these advertisements, like all of these messages, like you're not pretty enough, your skin has to be perfect. What does that even mean? But it's like, it's very, even as like a feminist, even as an educated person, it's very hard to not be susceptible to the messages that you're receiving. And so I can imagine, young girls, particularly, like if that's the only message that you receive, like they're actually responding in a logical way that is very tragic.
Is this on?
Yeah.
Who was the guy that said women put on some lipstick? Or there was one of the guys. I remember Ballard, because I remember him talking, because I got a tattoo when I was 18, got breast implants when I was 20, had to have them removed from severe reactions, but I was shamed for the tattoo, applauded for making my body more sexy in a sense. So I just always can't stand that guy. Don't put on lipstick. F that.
Yeah. Unless you want to, in which case, it's fine.
If it makes you feel good, great, but don't do it because someone's telling you to.
Absolutely. And I also think like and I'm making this sound like a weird La La Land, but Provo kind of is. So some of the young women in my parents' stake get breast implants as a high school graduation gift. That's like a thing, people, in Utah. And so it's like, can you imagine like your dad being like, all right, honey, now you can have bigger boobs. Like, I can't even imagine anything more awkward, and Mormons hate awkwardness, but it's just so tragic, so deeply tragic to me that that's something that a man or a parental figure would suggest that you need. And again, I think it just goes back to what is your value in Mormonism? It's procreation. And I think this actually goes back, I'm just going to go full Mormon here. I think this goes back to polygamy. And I think that, it's very unexplored, in my opinion, the lasting legacy of polygamy. Lindsay Hansen Park did a great series on Feminist Mormon Housewives podcast about this, but the lasting legacy of polygamy on control of our reproductive lives and control of our saleability to men. And so I think that needs to be talked about a lot more. And I think also particularly control of our reproductive lives is very tied to this lasting legacy of polygamy.
Thanks, Diane.
Should do a podcast about that.
Great question. Other questions? Yes.
Hi, I'm Nicole. I wanted to attend because I just love both of you. You're both a large part of my husband and my own story of transitioning out of the church. So, but
Yay.
I also, we're ex-Mormons. I wanted to attend as a parent tonight because I guess the conversation about safe sex is odd when you're in a monogamous marriage type relationship. Mm-hmm. But I wanted to attend as a parent, and I know you've mentioned several times you don't have children, but I think you have a great knowledge about this, and John also. And so I'm just wondering what you would recommend, advise us,
Yeah.
parents in Utah, or parents in America, maybe in whatever regard. What would you advise us to tell our children, especially young children? I have a toddler and one on the way, so I don't have someone I'm going to be like, let's sit down and look at these anatomy books right now. Yeah. But, how do you start that conversation at home? I think it's really important to start it at home because you're not going to get it in school. Mm-hmm. And
not in Utah.
Not in Utah, no. I'd just like to hear both of your ideas.
Well, I'm not in a great position to give parenting advice because I am childless by choice, and I think that's a very important way to say it because I'm not infertile. Most Mormons are like, oh, she doesn't have kids, she must be infertile. No, I am childless by choice, and I have been my whole life. But I think, first of all, it's great that you're asking the question. I think it's really important to think about those things beforehand, and also, a lot of parents in Utah are like, we think only parents should teach about sex ed. I'm like, yeah, but are those people really teaching their kids about sex? I don't think so. Like, those Eagle Forum ladies are not giving a comprehensive sex education. And so it's really important to understand, like, what's age appropriate, but start that very young. And let kids know, consent is something that you can talk about really early on, so that they know about abuse. They know about these different things. Like childhood sexual abuse is a plague, and is wildly common, far more than it needs to be or than it ought to be. There should be 0 instances of childhood sexual abuse, and part of that is tied to education. And I would say, I think another thing, honestly, I'm a Planned Parenthood missionary, but Planned Parenthood does have an education program. So if you're not getting what you need or the resources that you need in school, then we do have an entire education department. Even if you're an adult and you need that education, we can do, if you want Planned Parenthood to come teach at your Relief Society, we could do that. I think it's really, and just from a personal experience, and I'll let John chime in because I think he probably knows more about this than I do as having kids and teens. But from a personal perspective, it's important to just have open conversations about it between you and between your kids. I remember my mom, bless her heart, and I really hope she never listens to this podcast for so many reasons. But I remember my mom got pregnant when she was 15 and had a baby and gave her up for adoption. I didn't know that at the time. I didn't know that until I was 18, and she found our family, and she's now part of our family. The daughter. Mm-hmm, yeah. Wow. So I was raised the oldest, but I'm no longer the oldest because my sister who was adopted out found us. I remember my mom I overheard a conversation my mom was having on the phone with a friend, and she was talking about how she was scared that I was going to get teen pregnant to her friend, but she never said anything to me. Like, I overheard that conversation, and I'm also like, why did she think that? But at the time, I didn't know that she had gotten pregnant when she was 15. And so it's just weird that my mom would have that conversation with another adult, but not with me. And so I think it's important to have those conversations. Like, again, in Mormonism, it's just like we have so much baggage when it comes to sex. But if you can't untangle that baggage as a parent and have those conversations, then you're not going to be able to teach your children healthy sexuality.
So.
But you're a parent. You got to.
Yeah, I have 4 kids. Two things come to mind really. One is pornography and masturbation. How to talk to your kids about that, because really, being in the church and even coming out of it, that's often where the conversation can begin with your kids, and because there's a decent chance, whether you have a boy or a girl, that you're going to at some point look, if you want to, look at the internet. I've never done this actually, but sometimes siblings can look at the internet history of their other siblings and discover that your kids have been looking at porn, and that's pretty much going to happen to almost everybody's kids at some point. And I don't want to, share things about my own family. So I'm going to sort of create a fictitious child of mine. I'll call him Billy, right? And I just want to say something interesting about that, and I'm going to speak kind of in vagaries here, but I can imagine sort of how I would have that conversation with Billy. as I was an active, believing Mormon, or even a progressive, semi-believing Mormon, if I were to discover that Billy was looking at porn or masturbating, whatever, I could imagine the way I would react would be like alarm and, oh my gosh, this is terrible, and why did you do this? And a lot of guilt and shame about what did I do wrong, and how do we control the environment so that this never happens again, and trying to have these conversations where there's just a lot of guilt and a lot of shame and a lot of stigma and a lot of sadness. And, without going into any too much detail, there's a whole new conversation that can be had that's actually quite beautiful and empowering. And so imagine a scenario where you do discover that, let's just say your son has looked at pornography. And instead of it being one of shock and sadness and shame, it's like, oh, son, this is awesome. Come sit down. Let's talk about this for a second. And then when you engage in that conversation with your son, you start out by saying, you know what, son? This is totally normal. It's okay. Like pretty much every kid out there is doing this, and it's natural. The human body is a beautiful thing. Sex can be a wonderful thing. It's completely natural to be curious. And so you're doing pretty much what every kid does at your age. And it's okay. You're not bad. Don't feel sad or shame about this, but instead, it's so great that we're talking about this now. I hope you're always comfortable talking to us about this. And let's talk about it. Let's talk about what pornography is. Let's talk about kind of what the downsides of it are. Let's talk about how it depicts women. Let's talk about how it depicts sexuality, sometimes in a way that may not be realistic or healthy modeling for what you might experience someday. Let's talk about how, what it is that draws you to it. And maybe the child will say, well, Dad, I was just bored. Or maybe the kid will say, you know what, I don't know anything about sex, and I was just curious. Or I had a friend mention it. And you can just say, well, that's wonderful, and that's exciting, and that's okay. But then you can actually process it with the child, and you can say, hey, how did you feel looking at it? Did it feel exciting? Did you feel sad? You could feel guilty? And let's say the kid says, you know what? Yeah, it was kind of interesting and exciting, but I also felt kind of bad. And instead of having it be this angst, shame, guilt-ridden thing, you're teaching them to explore their own feelings, to explore their own understanding. You're teaching them that when they do something, that you're safe to sort of explore that with them, that they're not going to be shamed. And then it turns into a really educational, healthy discussion about what is healthy sexuality and what type of life do they want to live and what are their values. And all I can say is that if I were to have had this conversation with one of my children, I can tell you that it became a really beautiful, empowering, teaching moment where by the end of that conversation, my conversation with this fictitious child was actually really edifying. Like we're hugging each other and saying, I love you, Dad, and I love you, son, and life is beautiful, and let's keep learning together, and let's talk about this anytime. And I just want to say that that's a conversation I don't think I would have been able to ever have sort of 5-10 years ago. And it's a really beautiful thing that's come out of sort of my evolution. And that same sort of thing extends into sort of the idea of my teenage daughters ever being sexually active. Like, of course, one of the really odd things that happened as soon as I was excommunicated is all these Mormon boys in my daughter's high school started hitting my daughters up for sex, as if that their dad being excommunicated meant that they were now easy, open for business, And it was a really shocking thing for them, right?
Yikes.
And most of these were kids who were going to be going on missions in a year. That was really shocking. But even so, I would have thought, oh my gosh, I can't really rely on the church and the law of chastity to sort of say, do this because the prophet said so, or do this because that's what we do as Mormons. And that was really petrifying for me, and it still is in some ways, except to say that it's become a really beautiful thing. Like, I have to sort of treat my children as adults. I have to not just rely on authority and shame and rules and control as the way to try and mold or shape or manipulate their behavior. Instead, all that I have is sort of love, connection, and information and reason. So you get to have these beautiful conversations about what is an STI? What does it mean to be safe? What does it mean to protect yourself? My conversations with my daughters are about their own self-worth. It's not about their self-worth is dependent on whether or not they have sex. It's more about what are your goals in life? What do you want to accomplish? Who do you want to be? How do you want to be treated? Okay, how does that tie into what decisions you want to make in your life? And interestingly enough, even though my children aren't necessarily bound by the same rules that they had before, I think their behavior is sort of, one thing is you hear about what high school kids in Utah are doing, and there's a lot of crazy stuff going on amongst kids who are 6 months away from a mission or 18 months away from a mission. So it's certainly fallacious to think that just because you're in the church and teach the law of chastity that your kids aren't having sex. They're having all sorts of different types of sex. And sometimes really crazy things like it's anal, I don't want to get pregnant and I don't want to have sex, and so I'm going to have anal intercourse, as if that's sort of safer or, more moral in some twisted way. But aside from all that...
You won't get pregnant from that.
That is true, as far as we know. But it's been really neat to see that my daughters, the extent to which they are deciding not to be sexual, it's from a place of empowerment. It's from a place of education. It's from a place of what they want their life to be about. And hopefully they carry with them a sense that sex is a positive and a beautiful thing, and that it's something, if they ever have it, that they can look forward to, and that they'll be comfortable talking to us about. And isn't that what you want as a parent? You want your kids to feel comfortable telling you anything. And this has been a real gift to me, to Margie, and to our family, because sex has gone from something shameful and forbidden and regulated and controlled and dark to something that's brought us together in a way. So I don't know if that's helpful, but that's how it's played out for my family. I hope that's helpful. And tell me if there's anything I said that...
Oh, no, I was just going to say, I also think that one of the problems with the way that we're raised and socialized in Mormonism sexually is that then after leaving Mormonism, I've heard this from lots of people, that you can't, arousal is tied to whether it's wrong. And so, that's another thing that leads to, infidelity or polyamory, is because they're people just feel it had this weird connection with Mormonism and, sex being wrong, and then when it's not wrong, it's not entertaining, or it's not, enticing. And so I think that's a real disservice that we teach kids, that, these things like pornography on the internet or different things are just bad, and so it's so enticing and tantalizing. And then when you say oh, isn't that kind of a buzzkill? I'm no, actually, as a woman, I feel it's actually very it's real. It's, I don't know, turn on isn't the right word, but it's very part of the loving experience is having that conversation. And so to say oh, it's a turn off to have a conversation about it, I'm no, definitely not. And so I think we have to reverse that socialization in order for it to be a loving part of a healthy sexuality. I also have a word to say concerning pornography. I think that pornography in the church is this crazy obsession by the leaders of the church who are there's 5 pornography talks per general conference or something. It's always hit on, the priesthood session definitely got to have a porn talk. But the way that they fixate on it and the way that they talk about it is so not constructive to invent.
For their own goals, for their own ambitions,
it's
right?
Not constructive for their own ambitions. Utah is the highest paid internet pornography consumption. So we'll access porn, but we'll pay for it. And I think that it's just so unhealthy, the way that they focus on it and create pornography addiction, which actually doesn't exist. Like, it's not in the DSM. It's not a real thing, except for when it's created by almost like it's created by like a religious fixation on avoiding pornography.
And a negative shame spiral.
And there's like a lot of really relevant and legitimate critiques of pornography, like you said, like the way that women are viewed, the way that they're treated, the way it glorifies violence, and consent isn't a part of it, and et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot of legitimate critiques of mainstream porn that I think are valid, but I don't think that the way that the church treats pornography is constructive or valid at all. And I actually think, like, when you look up on the stage in general conference and you see women in a segregated section as completely, like, you know, in their Easter-colored outfits, as completely sexualized objects which are only for reproduction, like, that is porn, I think.
All right. Other questions or comments?
I had a question specifically for Kate, but I'd love for John to also contribute. And that question is, how did your understanding of the divine feminine, when you were a member of the church, influence your feminism, and where is your perspective on that subject now that you have no longer those feelings of loyalty to the institution? And also, John, if you have any particular views on what role perhaps the divine feminine could play in making this particular area more responsive to the needs and potential of women in the church or out of the church.
Thank you. I think that the divine feminine and Heavenly Mother is like a really interesting caveat in Mormonism, but it's kind of like a caveat. Like, you don't pray to Heavenly Mother, you don't talk about Heavenly Mother, there's no paintings of Heavenly Mother, there's no discussions about Heavenly Mother, there's conference talks about Heavenly Mother. Like, who is she? Like, I heard someone say, I can't remember who it was, I'm like, Heavenly Mother is kind of like a jerk because she totally abandoned all of her children. Like, there's no, like, she's...
Or weak, and she's just not strong enough to raise her voice.
Or,
right?
you know, Heavenly Father is a single parent. And so I think that the concept of Heavenly Mother is one that I think is unique and interesting, but not particularly it was not particularly empowering for me because it was never discussed openly. And so I think it has a lot of potential, but I don't think that potential is even remotely close to being coming to fruition, and didn't actually impact my life very much at all. I do think it's, like, again, it's a rich doctrine, especially for, like, cherry pickers who are like, look, we have, like, a Heavenly Mother and a Heavenly Father. Like, we're super equal. But I think that it's not explored. It's very, it's very hush-hush. You're, like, expressly forbidden from talking about it. So it's not actually that empowering, I don't think, for Mormon women. If you do worship Heavenly Mother, if you do pray to Heavenly Mother, you have to do so in complete secrecy. And so how empowering can that really be? And that kind of goes to my larger point about the future of Mormon feminism. I think a lot of Mormon feminists say, like, well, we can't, Ordain Women is asking for permission from the institutional hierarchy, so that's inherently a weak position to be advocating from. But I think that's untrue. And I think a lot of women like Joanna Brooks and Laurel Thatcher Ulrich and other Mormon feminists have said to me, Laura Thatcher Ulrich literally said to me, she's the one who said well-behaved women rarely make history, or seldom make history. And she, that quote has been extrapolated and reported out. She said to me, you just seem like you feel really oppressed. And I was like, excuse me? This was at a retreat, a feminist Mormon retreat. They do these retreats in the woods. And I said, with all due respect, you're a tenured Harvard professor. Like, you can't expect that your experience reflects that of most Mormon women. Most Mormon women have no access to, do loads of research about Heavenly Mother, or loads of research about the history of the Relief Society, or all these different things. What we have is our lived experience, and our lived experience is one where we are so fundamentally oppressed, where we are so closed off from the feminine divine, that I don't find that to be particularly redeeming. part of Mormonism. Now that I've left Mormonism, I would say that my spirituality is totally different. I call myself, someone called it the other day, an apatheistic. I just feel like there are more important questions than whether or not God exists, whether or not God is male or female. Like, that's just not important to me. Like, what grounds me and what's important to me is my lived experience and the lived experience of other women. So can women control their own bodies? Can women control their own fates? Can women access education? Can a person down the street, does she have enough to eat? Does she have a place to go? Those are the things and the questions that are important to me. So I actually don't think about God much at all.
Yeah, on the one hand, growing up, knowing that or believing there was a Heavenly Mother out there seemed really beautiful to me. It seemed one of the most beautiful and distinctive teachings of Mormonism. So I always loved that. And if we're going to anthropomorphize God and God's just male, that just seems wrong and messed up. So in theory, I've always loved, and for those who continue to want to believe in an anthropomorphized God, it's got to be that way for me, or it's just a non-starter. I love the promise of Mormon theology because it has the potential to be so empowering for women, because there are few other religions that offer a female deity, and if you think about these little girls and the chance that they have, and even young boys, to pray not just to a male figure, and not just pray, but to look up to not only a male figure, but a female figure. I think it's just completely beautiful. But the only thing worse, I think, than not having a female counterpart to a male God is to have that female counterpart, but to have her remain nameless and silent and completely invisible. Like, that's almost reinforcing the bad modeling that we have in our lived experiences here in our mortal existence. So it's kind of tragic, and I think I heard this from Michael Quinn once, that in many ways, some of the most beautiful elements of Mormon doctrine and theology, we kind of mothball and hide and sort of sell our birthright so that the evangelicals will be a little bit more friendly to us,
Even though they hate us in the end.
Yeah. So I'm all for, if we're going to have gender associated with deity, man, bring on the women for sure. I love it. So I think it's beautiful, and I think it's empowering. And just one of the things I loved about Ordain Women was that it's basically just saying we would be a better people. We would be a better organization. We'd be a better church. Our women would be stronger. Our men would be stronger. Everyone would benefit if we elevated the status of our women. We're sort of taking half of our intellectual capital, half of our talent, and sort of sticking it in this little box. Who would do that, who wanted to have the healthiest and best thriving community? So.
And I think this is one of the things that's really, like, sure, you can worship Heavenly Mother on your own. Sure, you can, like, a lot of women are like, we should just, like, you should take the power for yourself. And I'm like, I actually don't even know what that means in a Mormon context. Like, should I just run up there during a baby blessing and, like, just kind of elbow my way in? Like, that doesn't mean anything. That doesn't give substance to the fact that you feel excluded from ritual. And so I'm like secretly worshiping Heavenly Mother. That's not meaningful, in my opinion. It's meaningful to the individual, but that doesn't. And I think that's the beauty of Ordain Women, is that we're fighting for institutional recognition of what we already know, which is that we are equal. So it's not like begging the church to acknowledge that we are equal so that we can feel so ourselves. We know that we're equal. We feel that. We acknowledge that in our everyday lived experience and in our lives and with our partners. But we want the church to acknowledge that and recognize that and integrate this talent. And so, sure, I could leave. I could not be part of Ordain Women. It doesn't matter. But what does that do, not only for me, but what does that do for my niece, who's 3 years old and who is growing up Mormon and is going to learn when she's 12 that boys are better than her, like what does that do for the women that I met in Kenya who understand institutional racism more than almost anyone else in the world and want to change the church and make it a better place? Like it's almost like, it's funny because Mormon women are supposed to be very selfless, but I'm like, it's a very selfish thing to say, I'm just going to do what I want to do and leave the rest behind. I think the women who are continuing to do work in Ordain Women are doing like a very selfless and beautiful thing to change the institution.
Thanks for that question. All right. Any final questions or comments? Yes, we have. That's great.
Hi, guys. My name is Andrew, and I figured if we're talking about Mormonism and sex, we have to talk about Joseph Smith. So my question is more of, how do we talk to Mormons about the church's sexual past in a way that is not taboo and that we are trying to, cause a problem, when in reality we're just talking about facts that exist? And so, what's your take on that, both of you?
I mean, you have to have, in my experience, to talk to Orthodox Mormons about the realities of the history of the church, you have to have a really open relationship with them, and you have to come from a point of like mutual respect and understanding, and that's really hard because, and I know this sounds really condescending, but a lot of Mormons are just like la 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 la, and then they like take one like finger out and read one thing, and then they're like, oh, crash and burn, everything is terrible, I learned everything. And so it's really hard. It's hard to have those conversations where it's like, well, did you know, like, fact, did you know, like, nah. I remember before I started Ordain Women, I would randomly try to bring things up in Relief Society lessons. So I would be like, hey, yeah, the great thing about Emma Smith was she was Joseph Smith and Brigham Young's wife. Or like, I don't know, random factoid. Just like to start integrating things. So I didn't feel like a crazy person, like knowing the truth and then having people tell a totally different narrative. But it's hard. It's very difficult. I think it's really important. Like I said, polygamy, it goes back to polygamy for me. So it's really important to understand polygamy in order to understand like sexual repression, in order to understand control of women's reproductive lives, in order to understand that our sole value is for our reproductive capabilities. Like a lot of that goes back to the bedrock of polygamy. And if you don't know that polygamy existed, or if you do know, you very recently learned it, and you only read like the church's sources that were created to inoculate people against knowing those facts, like it's really hard to have those conversations. So I don't know, I'm like not in the greatest position to be like, this is how you have great conversations with Orthodox Mormons about really hard subjects. But I think if you really do want to have a conversation with them, it has to come from a place of like, they feel safe that you accept them. Because in any situation where you're doing something that like you feel is morally superior, even if you don't say it, they think that you're judging them. So like when I was on my mission, I decided to go off sugar, and I just wouldn't eat desserts. But people were like offended. Like people were like, no, you have to eat this like cream whatever pie. You have to eat this flan. You have to eat this thing. And it almost to me seemed like people didn't want to acknowledge that they could also make that choice for themselves, or that I was judging them for like eating the dessert. And I never was judging anyone. I made a choice for myself. And so it's really hard to make that choice for yourself while simultaneously making other people not feel judged for making the same choice.
Yeah. My quick response would just be that I don't know that this is true for all believing Mormons, but I sort of look at the Orthodox mindset as like this really heavy metal bar that you kind of have to hold with two hands to keep it from falling down. And there's this other bar over here that's just as heavy, which is sort of a different mindset. And it's almost as if to ever be able to have an attempt to hold this other bar, you have to drop the bar that you have. And it's kind of a weird metaphor, but my point is, I don't know that you can be an Orthodox believing Mormon and really have the ability to sort of take on an alternative mindset and consider it with objectivity without fearing the unraveling of your own worldview. And I don't say that to belittle anybody. That's just my experience in trying to have these sorts of conversations. What I know is what Kate said, which is trying to push information on people is psychologically, you create resistance the moment that you try and force information towards somebody. So that never works. It usually backfires, and you create a stronger sort of retrenchment on the other end. It's great when people are curious and interested, and that's really the only way you really should have a conversation, is if somebody's coming to you saying, what was it about sexuality or polygamy? And one of the great services that the church has provided is sort of these essays as a starting point to at least substantiate many of the basic historical claims around Joseph Smith's polygamy and sexuality. Now, obviously, those essays have a lot of problems with them, and they leave a lot to be desired. Having said that, they do acknowledge some pretty basic, important facts, and we need to sort of acknowledge that can be a really positive thing. But even the essays, if forced upon an Orthodox Mormon who isn't willing or interested in actually reading them, you've all heard the crazy responses, right? That's anti-Mormon literature, that someone has hacked and taken over LDS.org and placed false information there. You really just can't have a conversation with somebody who isn't interested and open to that point of view. And interestingly, one of the most damaging things I've seen is sort of a lot of the twisted logic that many apologists use to justify what I think is some pretty egregious sexual behavior in early Mormon history. So if somebody's going to have an Orthodox believing Mormon mindset, I almost don't want them trying to think about or rationalize or justify a lot of the behavior that's happened, because I just don't think it's justifiable. And so I don't feel super optimistic about attempting to have those conversations when people aren't ready and desirous to have them. I think it always backfires. So instead, just love people, model a happy, healthy life, and wait for them to come to you with information. And once they are genuinely interested and open, then you can share with them not only the essays, but other very credible, reputable history that can give them the full story. And once they're open and ready, they'll weigh the evidence and come to their own conclusions.
I think one of the most infuriating things, though, about Mormons is that the practice of reversibility is almost never true. So like they can evangelize to you, they can tell you that they're praying for you, they can tell you that your choices like hurt their lifestyle or whatever, but you can't do the reverse. So you can't say like, well, interestingly, you should mention that. Did you know X, Y, or Z? Or, well, I wrote a letter, and I'm praying that you leave the church because your institution fundamentally oppresses women, gay people, people of color, marginalized communities. Like, I think that what you're doing is morally wrong, and you should stop paying tithing. Like, you never get to say that. You never get to say the reverse, but they always get to say the thing to you. And so I think, like, I don't know, I think we should navigate that a little bit differently and have, like, just like the reverse, like have the audacity that Mormons have sometimes. Like, you know, if I'm ever going to get married again, like maybe I'll have a wedding where we check temple recommends at the door and people who have them aren't allowed to come in because I don't consider them to be worthy of attending my wedding. So, you know, the reverse is like absurd. Like, oh, that's totally absurd. Who would ever do that? Only a sociopath. And it's like, oh, wait, no, all Mormons.
That's fun.
And on that note.
At least one more question.
Oh, good.
Hi, Kate. Hi, John.
Hi.
Rape and sexual assault is an act of violence and sometimes leads to pregnancy. As a taxpayer, I'm happy that federal dollars go to helping victims in that category. On the other hand, it seems to me that most abortions are the product of consensual, recreational sex. And I'm not happy that my tax dollars pay for someone else's recreation any more than asking a federal program to buy me a snowboard ski pass or new sports equipment. So that's where I would draw the line. Comment on what I've just said. Does it seem reasonable? And do you get clients at Planned Parenthood from both categories, and both categories draw on federal funding?
Okay. I want to know what recreational sex is. I thought all sex was recreational, except for non-consensual. So I think, again, the fundamental root of the problem in that question is it's posed in a way to say that some people are making a moral choice, and some people are allowed to terminate their pregnancies, and some people are not allowed to terminate their pregnancies. And I want to choose what I do with my tax dollars. So, for example, I think that heterosexual, this isn't what you said, but this is an example, heterosexual parents are doing the moral thing and having children, and so I want my tax dollars to go to them, but I don't want my tax dollars to go to homosexual parents because I disagree with their lifestyle, or all the millions of different things that people could choose their tax dollars to go for. I don't believe in war. I think war is an act of aggression and universally wrong, but I don't get to check the box on my taxes that says I don't want my wars to fund, or my taxes to fund wars of aggression in Iraq and Afghanistan. And so I think that's just fundamentally a decision that we don't get to make in a cooperative system of democratic governance. Second of all, I think that it's not up to you and to say whether or not most abortions are the result of consensual sex. I don't know that there are statistics on that, but again, I think it should be up to the woman to decide, and that's a very tricky distinction to make. So if you actually fall into the exceptions of rape or incest, do you have to report it to the police? What if you can't report it to the police? What if it's a result of incest? What if it's a loved one that's very close to you and you can't? So there's a lot of reasons where someone would have a non-consensual sexual encounter and they would not be able to report that as a crime. So it's not up to you, and it's not up to any man to decide whether or not I had a consensual interaction that resulted in a pregnancy. And I just don't think, also federal tax dollars do not go to any abortion care procedure, except for they are covered by Medicaid in very limited circumstances. But again, those circumstances are circumstances that people in positions of power have decided that their moral authority decides that it's okay for you to do this in this circumstance, but it's not okay for you to do this in a different circumstance. And I think that is fundamentally flawed and absurd.
So if federal dollars were to go to Planned Parenthood and or abortion, could you make an argument for why that would be in the taxpayer's interest to support that?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of reasons. As you know, first and foremost, we should have single-payer health care where everyone has access to universal health care so that no one has to go through any sort of medical emergency without having that funded. That's just a basic human right, and that should exist. It doesn't, and so I think that there are a lot of reasons why people should support women who want to terminate their pregnancies. Again, this myth of women who are just like doing it for fun, like recreational abortion, that does not exist. Abortion actually is going down. 2014 was the lowest year ever of abortion in Utah, and a lot of that is because access to contraception is improving, and also education is improving. And so I think if we're wanting to eliminate or reduce abortions, what we should do is heavily fund programs that educate and provide contraception. But I think that can you think of any other medical procedure where people are like, that's covered by Medicaid, but I like morally disagree with that, so I don't want that to happen. Like, I don't want anyone getting a colonoscopy because I think that's wrong. Or do Jehovah's Witnesses not to get to contribute their tax dollars to blood transfusions because they think they're wrong. There's no other medical procedure where people would get to decide whether or not they get to fund that or not fund that. And so again, it goes back to, it's not actually a medical question, it's a question of my moral superiority and my, I think that I get to decide whether or not it's wrong or right. You don't get to decide whether it's wrong or not. I get to decide as a woman whether it's wrong or right. And so I think that question is really problematic because it reveals an underlying tone of misogyny.
Thank you. All right. Thanks for the question. If you don't mind, please join me in giving Kate Kelly a round of applause for speaking as a as a Mormon and as a post-Mormon, I just want you to know I'm really proud to, have been walking alongside of you during our years together, and I'm proud to call you a friend, and I really admire you for your courage and your intellect and your passion and your strength, and it's just so wonderful to see you alive and thriving and fighting for things you believe in, and you're an inspiration to so many people. So thank you for being you, and thank you for coming on Mormon Stories.
Thank you.
I also want to thank all of you for coming tonight. We know that you have many things that you could be doing, and your support really means the world. So thank you for being here tonight. We hope that you'll join us again for future events. Tell your friends. If any of you are financial supporters of Mormon Stories, for those of you listening, anyone who supports what we do, all we're trying to do is to sort of promote healing and growth within our culture. And so it's a real pleasure for me to have the opportunity to do what I do, and I'll keep doing it as long as people are finding value in it. So I want to thank everyone here and listening who has supported us in the past, because that's what makes it possible. So thank you so much. And I'll just end by again thanking Club Cafe at 50 West and Jake Jensen and the people at Broadway Media for their support. This wouldn't be happening without them. Diana, you've also been a really good supporter, so I'm going to shout out your name as well. And I'll just also close by just saying that we're going to have many more events in the future. Mormon Stories continues, Mormon Transitions, A Thoughtful Faith, Mormon Matters. We continue to try and provide you with whatever information you need, so please check us out online if you haven't. Please share our work with others. Please invite people back. And again, give us your feedback. We'll be posting this online, and so if you have questions or thoughts or comments, please share them. If you have ideas of topics that you'd like to hear about, we'd love to hear from you. And we'll keep providing you whatever you feel like you need to find joy and happiness. So thanks for joining us tonight. Please drive home safely, and we hope to see you again really soon. Take care.